Good evening, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to the Martha Swain Speaker Series event of 2022. My name is Mackenzie Pierce. I'm an honors student here at the W, majoring in political science. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers tonight and to coordinate this event. The Martha Swain Series brings distinguished guests to campus to speak in March as a part of Women's History Month here at the W. Dr. Swain is here tonight, so we want to acknowledge her. So if everyone can give her a round of applause for coming out. This series features issues important to women's interests, lives, and experiences. Tonight's event is also sponsored by the Heine E. Gordon Honors College. We also want to thank Emily Liner and Friendly City Books for the wonderful book signing that preceded our talk tonight. Thanks to all our partners and to you in the audience for turning out for such an important topic and during the busy part of the semester. Tonight, we want to celebrate the life and work of Sister and Dr. Ann Brooks. Part of why we wanted to bring this book to the attention of campus is because of the extraordinary life of Sister Brooks and how she turned her life to purpose for service of others. Her story is that of a religious woman, a nun, a young woman who sought to understand her difficult childhood, and a doctor who sought to help her impoverished parents. Her life and the book written about her by Sally Thomason and Jean Fisher touches on so many aspects of the woman experience, even as Sister Brooks was and is exceptionally uncommon. As we continue to deal with life in the second year of a global pandemic, focusing on spiritual and our connection to it, and focusing on the lives of healthcare providers seems so timely. We have relied on doctors, nurses, and the entire healthcare system so much in the last 2 years. But who do they rely on? What meaning do doctors and nurses find in their work and what keeps them going? This book allows us to better understand the motivations of one remarkable doctor and nun, Sister Ann Brooks. The authors of this book are remarkable women too. Sally Palmer Thomason and Jean Carter Fisher came of age during World War II and the Cold War. Dr. Thomason grew up in California and earned a BA in political science, my major, at Occidental College, where she won an exchange scholarship to study for a year at the International Graduate Institute or School of the University of Stockholm. She moved to Memphis and married in 1956 and became executive director of the Memphis Arts Council. She went on to be dean of continuing and corporate education at Rhodes College in Memphis. After retiring, she pursued a PhD in holistic aging from the Union Institute and University. In addition to The Power of One, Dr. Thomason has written and published widely, including The Living Spirit of the Crone, Turning Aging Inside Out, and Delta Rainbow, The Irrepressible Betty Bobo Pearson. She has 3 children, all adults now, 4 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandson. Miss Jean Carter Fisher is the daughter of the South. She grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Atlanta, Georgia, and attended Vanderbilt as an English major. She was selected as a maid of cotton, which was a beauty pageant from that time, and even went on tour. After marriage and 3 children, she resumed college at Rhodes in 1969, changing her major to religious studies, and graduated Phi Beta Kappa. She went on to complete a Master's of Social Work from the University of Tennessee, Memphis, and began a career as a social worker for 47 years. In her professional work, she served as Director of Social Work at St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital and the Director of Outpatient Clinics and Services at Lakeside Behavioral Health. She retired in 2020 from that work and began to work in a new field as an author. Such fascinating career trajectories, as neither were straightforward, we definitely want to leave time for Q&A to ask questions about their career paths and about the many different professional positions they have held in their lives. Now I'll turn it over to Dr. Thomason and Ms. Fisher with Q&A to follow.
Thank you, Mary. And thank you all for moving up a little closer. I want to tell you, coming down to Columbus, this is my first time here, and I am just overwhelmed with the friendliness of your place. It's what you really have earned and perpetuated. Your moniker, which is a friendly city, and because that is all we have found in our time here. And I just feel very, very honored that the Swain sisters are here tonight to be in their presence as we celebrate the remarkable women of Mississippi. And I have to say, it's kind of a real great pleasure because here I am in California originally and sitting at the W. That's an amazing feat. And I also want to thank Emily of our friendly bookstore and her mother, who have just been beautiful hostesses, because that is part of the joy that we found so far in being here. One thing that is really very interesting, it seems like you have to get kind of old to be able to sit up here on this stage. It's kind of a review of life. And Jean and I were talking, and with her 85 years and my 88 years, we have 173 years of experience right between us. So I wonder if you've ever had that much experience right on this stage. But anyway, I hope so. And of course, I want to say that Erin has just been a fabulous hostess, and she asked me why the title of the book, and I think that's really a very interesting question because of the experience that we had when it came after we'd done the research, the writing, the editing, and had submitted it to the University Press of Mississippi. The people there were saying, well, don't you think you need spirit in the titles? And we thought about that, and that was a very important question because I think Anne Brooks had one of the most remarkable spirits of anyone I've ever met. And yet there was something more in her that really just, I know that her spirit fed it, but it was power. And it was the power, and I just, in thinking about what I would say tonight, how we came about, how we decided on the title was, we went to the dictionary, and spirit, and now, here we all on the dictionary's wonderful friends, and they said, it is the non-physical part of a person, the seat of emotions and character, the soul. And then we went to power, and we looked that up, and it's the ability to do something or act in a certain way, the capacity or ability to direct or influence others. And that definition fits Anne Brooks so completely. I'm curious, how many, if anyone, has read the book? Oh, well, Emily, you have a lot of sales to make, I hope, anyway. But I want to read the very first line in the book, in the preface. This is the story of two opposing powers, the personal, professional, and spiritual power of Sister Anne Brooks, a dynamic Catholic nun, and doctor of osteopathy, matched against the horrific power of poverty and racism in a small, dying Mississippi hamlet. Tutwiler had been declared by the United States Congress as the poorest county, Tallahatchie County, I should say, where Tutwiler is, had been declared the most impoverished county in the nation and was much worse off than many third world countries. So this is the story of how and what Anne Brooks did. She was a remarkable power to ignite, teach, and activate and was a really important part of her story, is she had the ability to activate the power of others and help them when they were down to start to believe in themselves and know that that's where their generation of the power from within was going to change their lives. She was a large woman, but she was a very soft-spoken woman. She had the poise and gentleness, but firmness. And when you meet her, she never raises her voice. And I don't know. I mean, we spent a good bit of time with her in interviewing her, and it was always just a calm presence that was really reassuring. And that's the type of presence that she brought to everything she did and influenced so many people. She was a spiritual woman. She spent the first half hour of every morning of her, I'm going to tell you a little about her background, but after she became a Catholic, every morning she spent at least a half an hour in prayer and talking with God, and that was part of who she was. And then when she addressed others and when she was with others, there was never any proselytizing or any trying to think. It was just, she went along trying to activate and help and teach others. But she had a remarkably large public life. But the thing about her too that was so interesting, as we found as we researched her story, is that she had a very rich private life. She kept a journal. As a matter of fact, in the back of the book, we have included some of her beautiful writing. She even tried poetry at times, and she had that part. But also in the back of the book, we have 3 pages of the honors and accolades and advanced honorary degrees from various institutions across the nation that she received. And actually it's 3.5 pages of that. And she was so accomplished. She was, for instance, as a woman, I think you all would be interested in, she became the first woman for chief of staff at the regional hospital there in Clarksdale. Thank you. But that's I'm jumping ahead, because what I want to do is tell you a brief sketch of her background, because it's very surprising. Her parents both were, her father and her mother were both children of very large families. They had 6, 7, and 8 children, and both of their fathers or their grandfathers were professors who had taught in various institutions across the nation, but they were at the University of Illinois, and that is where Anne's parents met. But Anne was not named Anne when she was born. She was born in 1938, and she was named Catherine Freelander Brooks. And everyone called her Kitty. And her parents, at the time that she was married, her father was had gone in the Navy. 10 years of her parents' life, he was at sea. And then when he came back to the U.S., he was assigned to an administrative job in Washington, D.C. And so he and Anne's mother were really living together for the first time in their married life. They had, of course, gotten together at various ports and such, but this was the first time. So when Anne was born, her mother was 40 years old and her father was 41 years old, and that was in 1938. Now, when she was 3 years old then, World War II broke out, and her father, being in the Navy, was called to action and called to go to the Pacific, and he spent then the next 4.5 years, 5 years, in the Navy, away from Anne or it was then Kitty and her mother. And they had moved to a very nice neighborhood in Chevy Chase, Maryland, just right outside of Washington, D.C. This was largely a very Catholic neighborhood, and both of her parents were very anti-Catholic. And so they would not permit Kitty to go into any of the houses in the neighborhood. And so Kitty had a wonderful time. She loved her neighborhood and she played, and sometimes, unbeknownst to her mother, who was now living alone, she had her best friend lived across the street who was a Catholic, and she got to know them. And she played, but she was always home. Her mother was very, very lonesome, and it was very hard for her to have her husband away, living in a neighborhood where she felt a lot of hostility, and she had a little girl to raise by herself, and she started to drink, and she started to drink a whole lot, and she became alcoholic. And so Kitty, however, when she started school as a 5th grader, went to probably the most prestigious school in the grammar school in the country. It's Sidwell in Washington, D.C., where several of the president's children, such as Carter and I think Nixon's and such, their daughters and children had gone to. And the school bus would come to pick her up and take her to the school, and then they'd bring her home. And her mother just stayed in the house, smoked and drank, and listened to the news on the radio because of course it was during World War II. Well, thankfully the war was over. Daddy came home, and it was a wonderful time for about 4 or 5 months. And then her parents started arguing nightly, and it was violence in the household, and it was getting really bad. And finally, I think her father requested a transfer, and he got it, and he was to go down to Key West, Florida, and the mama was in the kitchen, and Kitty were in a kind of the den, and he told Kitty, and Kitty said, "Oh, Daddy, take me with you." And he thought, well, her mother was in such bad shape, he thought, well, that's probably a good idea, but we can't tell your mother. So she was going to the hairdresser the next day, and so he said, okay, we'll just put everything you want in the bottom drawer of your dresser, and I'll pick you up at school, after getting your clothes. And she said, and she had her most favorite possession at that time was a little dog. And so she said, well, what about him? And he said, okay, I'll bring him. So he picked it up, they started driving, and they got down to Key West. Well, Daddy was going to stay at the BOQ, so what do you do? Now Kitty is 11 years old. And what do you do with an 11-year-old? Well, there was a boarding school, Catholic boarding school, there in Key West, And he took Kitty over and said, can you take this little girl? And they tested her. And she tested off so well that she skipped a grade. So now she is going to do the 8th grade. They go in the 8th grade, and it's the strangest experience that Anne would tell us about it. And she said, it was just a different world. And there were all these symbols and these things I couldn't understand, and had to be quiet for this and that. It was just, and she was sleeping in a dormitory room where she had never been in a room with anyone else, and it was a very strange experience for her, and she didn't know what to make of it. But then, after about 3 months, I want to read what happened then, because she was there in the whoops, I've lost my, oh dear, where it is, here it is. Well, one morning, after Kitty had been at Mary Immaculate for almost 6 weeks, oh, it was less than that, she pushed open the door of a stall in the lavatory to see one of her favorite nuns cleaning the toilet. Sister Anne, what are you doing? You shouldn't have to do that. No, Kitty, you are wrong. In God's eyes, there are no demeaning tasks. Keeping our world clean and healthy is our secret duty. It was in this moment that 11-year-old Catherine Vreeland Brooks made a decision. She knew she wanted to become a nun. She wanted to be a part of this dedicated, caring, love-filled family, so very different from anything she had ever known. Well, she went ahead and finished her year there in the convent school. And in the meantime, her parents were getting a divorce, and her father had had another woman that he was going to marry. But he was going to pull Kitty out of the convent school and go to another school, which she heard had a pretty rough reputation. And so she didn't know what she was going to do. They went to the divorce court, and the judge asked Kitty, well, what do you want to do? And it surprised her when no adult had ever asked her what she wanted to do. And she said, I want to go back to my mother in Chevy Chase. And because she had a plan, and her plan was to go back to Chevy Chase, and there was a Catholic girls' school in that area that her friend who had lived across the street was going to, and lo and behold, Kitty got a scholarship, a 4-year scholarship, and went to that school. She then took the lessons to become a Catholic, and she became a Catholic, and because she had decided what she wanted to do, and she then, on graduation, had applied for the system to become a nun, and she then on graduation was going to go to a convent up in Latham, New York. And that is where she went, and she entered the convent up there and started as a postulate, a novitiate. I'm learning the Catholic names. As a novitiate to become a nun. She started her study, and then, but after about, I think it's 3 months, it was ready to become a postulate, which meant that she would be start to wear a habit, but most significantly, she would take a new name. And she took as her new name Anne Eucharista Brooks. And that was the name that she was given. And when Jean and I were interviewing her, we said, why in the world you really had such a terrible time with your mother? By the way, her mother had died when Anne was living with her there in Chevy Chase, when Anne was a senior there in high school. And there was an amazing thing of her getting her to the, she found her on the floor in a coma, and getting her to the hospital is just another story. But anyway, we knew that, and so we said, well, why did you take the name Anne? And she said, well, when asked why she chose Anne as her new name, she responded, good question. It was the name of her mother, of whom she had disdainful, horrible memories. But her response was, somehow the difficulty I had with her in my lifetime was erased. I don't know how that happened. It was just gone. So when I had a chance to honor her, in spite of her constant smoking and in spite of her drunkenness all the time, it seemed right for me to be Anne. I wasn't sure I loved my mother. She was very difficult. She was always smoking. She always smelled terrible. I hated to kiss her, and then I wouldn't. I didn't think Mom was good for much. My father cussed. I thought she hated my father. They always had fights. She was always sitting in the corner and so forth. But Anne did go on with her studies, but something really bad happened to her. She started getting these horrible pains, and it was diagnosed as arthritis, and it got very, very difficult for her to get around. And in fact, when the other girls that were in the that went out to play, or there was a big lake there, and went swimming or boating, or just, playing sports or just walking, Anne couldn't participate. And it got really, really so difficult that by the time she graduated, there were 3 years there, she was having to use a wheelchair. And she was worried, but she persevered and got through, and she became a teacher. And she was assigned down to Florida. She went to Florida, and she used to have, if there would be a student in a wheelchair in the school she was teaching, they would race down the hall. She would come, and she just was an amazing woman. And there was a high school where she had been asked, she was teaching there for 18 years, and one of the last teaching places was a high school that was an all-black high school in those years. And she used to get the kids to pick up her wheelchair and carry up the stairs so she could go up to the second floor. That closed because that was in Tampa, and some race riots actually made the school close. And so she then started in another school, but she just had this urge to do something more. And the other school was in a fairly wealthy district there in St. Petersburg, Florida. And so she then was reading and saw an ad in the paper for volunteers for a free clinic. And so she called, and they would take her. Well, she would teach in the morning or till after school about 3 o'clock, get in her car, drive 35 minutes, and go, and was in this free clinic there in St. Petersburg. After a year, they were so impressed with her, they asked her to become the director of the free medical clinic, and that was serving people that came in who could not afford the health care, but was what do I want to say, the doctors who were there, it was in the evening, and so the doctors would work in their offices all day. There were regular doctors, then they would volunteer their services there at the clinic. And one night, she was there, and she was lean. She wore a back brace all the time, and if she could stand up, she would stand and lean against the wall. And a doctor, John Upledger, was doing his volunteer service that day, and he said, why are you leaning against the wall? And she said, because I hurt. And he said, oh, I could help you with that. I've just done I've been to an acupuncture clinic. Now this was in the late 70s, and she said, no thanks, I'm not interested. Well, Dr. Upledger was a doctor of osteopathic medicine, and he had a very holistic approach to the way you treat illness. And so he said, fine, but if you're interested, and just let me know and you can come in. And so she prayed and she thought about it for about 2 weeks. She thought, well, maybe, who knows? So she went to Dr. Upledger, who treated her for more than a year, worked with her, and within a year, she was walking again for the first time in 18 years. She could walk. Well, then he said, and I think maybe you should become a doctor. And she said, look, I'm 40 years old. Wait a minute. He said, no. And besides, I can't afford it. And he said, no, yeah, you can. Because there is a government program that if you will agree to go to a clinic that needs a free clinic like this one and serve in that place for 3 years, which is going to take you to get through osteopathic school, then become a DO, then they'll pay for it. They'll pay your tuition. She said, well, if I can pass chemistry, well, of course she could pass chemistry, and she then went up to Michigan for 3 years, did her osteopathic training, and it's incredible. I don't see how she did everything else she did while she was there, but she graduated. And she then started looking for a place to go. And the summer after she graduated, I guess it was the summer before her last year, she drove all around the South. She knew she wanted to go to the South. She was getting tired of those cold winters up north. And so nothing really suited her. So then she came back, and there was a kind of a book of places, a directory of areas that needed this kind of help. And so she went through it. She wrote 40 letters to various places, free clinics around the southern part of the country. And she got one reply. And that was from Tutwiler, Mississippi. And that was it was very strange to her, because she knew about Tutwiler, Mississippi, because the first 3 months when she had started the convent up in Nathan, New York, the papers were filled with the Emmett Till trial story. And it had really touched her heart. And she thought, well, I'll go to Tutwiler on the interview. And so Jean's going to tell you what happened.
Okay, I will. I'm Jean, and the other half is 178 amount of wisdom sitting up here on the stage. So hopefully we will entertain you and give you some of the wisdom that we have accumulated. As Sally said, she contacted 40 different places. That's an amazing amount, particularly for somebody who's coming to give the services that they needed. Nobody wanted it. So only, as she said, Tutwiler responded. And so when she went there, they were in the interview, and she started out by saying, look, I'm a Catholic nun and a doctor. And if that's a problem, let me know now, and I'm out of here. After she said that, there was silence. Nobody said anything, and she thought that they didn't want it. An alderman stood up and he said, I want to let you know that we have $19,000 from the city to renovate the clinic. And she was astounded because she didn't know they had a clinic. But that was overjoying to her because that was just a bonus for her. She started right away. And I'd like
Excuse me, Jean, I wanted to add, the clinic had been closed for 5 years because no doctor would serve, no doctor wanted to come to Tutwiler to be in this. When you read the descriptions, you can't believe anyone's living in a little town like this. But anyway, go ahead. And so it had been closed for 5 years.
they would come and they wouldn't stay. They'd run off after a couple of years because of the condition of the town, the conditions that they would have to live in. But when Sally mentioned our talking about what the title would be, and we did consider when the lights came on in Tallahatchie County, because that's what this woman did in going herself and then attracting nuns to come with her and opening the clinic and opening up the town again. They were challenged by this grinding poverty. But she managed to empower the people and to change the town. Sally's talking about what the town looked like. The employment was almost non-existent. The jobs, it was an agricultural setting, and that would be agricultural jobs. Well, with the mechanism for agriculture that came in place, the jobs dried up. And at the time that she came, almost all, the only jobs that were available was a nearby prison. And to get to the prison, there was no transportation, no public transportation, and they would have to hire somebody to drive them in their car, and they would have to pay for that. So the minimum wage at the prison was not much to their benefit, having to take that money out. The housing, I'd like to read to you something about the housing that speaks so deeply to it. Part of what Anne was able to do was to bring publicity to the town and to the clinic. And that helped her build and it helped her raise money. One of the things that she was able to attract was a session on 60 Minutes. And I'm sure you all know what that is. It's the weekly newscast on Sunday nights. And on this particular time, Harry Reesner said this about it. Many of the substandard shanties Dr. Brooks' patients called home were perched on the Hobson Bayou that runs through the center of Tutwiler. The flooding of the bayou was a major problem. 20% of the homes lacked indoor plumbing, and raw sewage was routinely dumped from slop jars into the bayou's waters, which overflowed 2 or 3 times a year. At least 2 to 6 inches of water annually seeped into these houses along the Hudson Bayou. Some homes got 12 inches of water 3 times a year, with raw sewage in that water. And when the waters receded, filth and dead animals were left behind. And those were people who were pleased to get any kind of housing at all, because many of them didn't have permanent homes. The other situation that she had to face was the malnutrition and disease that was there in the town, widespread. And it was said that was worse than third world countries. As Sally mentioned, the Congress itself has declared this place the poorest place in the nation. For example, more babies died before their first birthday than those in the third world. And another example of how desperately help is needed for people. When Dr. Brooks arrived, the waiting room was more like an emergency room with extremely sick people because they had not had any preventive care for years. High blood pressure and diabetes and brain damage, all of that was what she was faced with, getting it under control, and she did. After they had a period of time where she was helping people learn how to take care of themselves, the severity of the illness subsided. With the medical care, what she found is she treated women who had never had a pap smear or a breast exam. She spoke with us about a 14-year-old girl who was pregnant for the second time, babies who were fed soda pop and potato chips, and that was considered food. She mentioned a grandmother who brought a child in after pouring turpentine in her ear to treat pain, which was actually a ruptured eardrum. Her task was to help these people learn how to take care of themselves, of their bodies, how they actually function. And she had to start from zero, helping them up because no one had done this for years. One of the reasons people had not had any treatment was because of payment. They didn't come because they did not have money to pay even the small copay. Sister Anne's response to that was to establish what she called the pearly gates insurance, to pay for care for people who couldn't afford it. And she paid that because of the donations that she raised. She was a specifically splendid fundraiser. And that's how she helped the people that couldn't pay. She said she called it the pearly gates because she didn't want to get to the pearly gates and have somebody tell her that she had not done her job because she didn't treat somebody's diabetes because of medication. Another stumbling block in the town across the board was illiteracy. Many of her patients couldn't read the prescriptions, or they couldn't read the directions on their prescription bottles. And her response to that was she talked a lot in a very quiet manner, and she would use drawings. She would use big paper on the walls to draw and show the person what that organ looked like and what the medication was going to do for them. There was a huge population migration, as you can imagine from this description. People didn't stick around that didn't have to. And specifically, those doctors had run off. As Sally said, the clinic had been closed for 5 to 6 years. No doctor was willing to stay in practice in Tallahatchie. The living conditions that the people there had were the same ones that the doctors were going to have to overcome. The first thing she did was the renovations with that $19,000. And the first part of that renovation was the clinic was divided into 2 sections, with the white people's waiting room and the black people's waiting room. The first thing she did was go in and tear that wall down so that they had one waiting room. She felt that this was the right place for her to retain her loans and to carry out God's and the Pope's mission. Pope John the 23rd had previously had the Second Vatican and declared that the church was going to open up and go out into the world. And specifically, he directed the nuns to come out of the cloisters, out of the convents, and go out into the big world. And that's exactly what she was doing. One of the biggest obstacles she had was getting the patients to trust her. First of all the other doctors that came had left. So about the time you get attached to one, they run off. The other big obstacle was that she needed to help them learn to trust a white woman. They had not had that kind of care from a white woman specifically, not just a woman, but not just not a white man, but a white woman. So they were very reluctant to come, and the word began to spread that she was steady and that she was kind, and they began to come. She was very proud to tell us about one story of one of her patients who said, "I don't care, even if you are white, I'm going to hug you." But that was a big breakthrough for her. Her philosophy of treatment was, as Sally said, holistic medication. It was not just treating the disease, but treating the person in their own space, in their own family, in their own town. She looked at whether people were in good marriages, how the children were behaving, how they were accomplishing, and it was not just that person and that disease, but everything that was affecting that person's life. The belief that was the core came from her was that if she cared about them, if she showed them by her touch and her conversation and her persistence to get them to do what they were going to do. In fact, one of her assistants told us that she would hear Sister Ann in a very loud voice tell people, "If you don't take that medicine, you're going to die." So she got their attention in any way that she could. She believed that if she showed them that she cared about them, that they would begin to care about themselves. And she also gave them the tools to care about themselves. They hadn't had the money for medication, they hadn't had the training. She believed that successful treatment came, the first thing that came was trust, and that's what she and the other nuns worked to promote. She did what other doctors had not done. She would go on home visits, and she'd go even in the middle of the night. And she said that people began to trust her when she also would come to the hospital. Other doctors had just sent them to the hospital for emergencies and didn't follow up on it. But Sister Ann did regular rounds in the mornings in the hospital for people that she had sent. Mostly, I think, they began to trust her because she stayed. She persevered and she didn't leave, and she didn't let her down. Throughout the information that we saw where people wrote about her care, they made a big point of the fact that she was practicing without preaching. She was a Catholic nun. She made that known, but there was not judgment. She was practicing without preaching. She focused on explaining and listening. One of the most important part of what she did there was fundraising. She used her savvy and her charisma to attract money and put that to use in the clinic. For instance, the money that she got to have the Pearly Gates insurance. After, and the effect of that is dramatic. For instance, after the 60-minute segment, 21,000 donors sent things to the clinic, not just money, but they sent. She said it was amazing. They sent diapers, they sent formula, they sent renovated bicycles. She had a way of being able to present what she needed in such a way to attract people's kindness and feeling of being able to do something from someplace that really needed what they had to offer. She was a gentle nun, and you would think that a gentle nun would know about money, but she was very savvy about money. The services of the clinic cost $402,000, and Medicare and Medicaid only paid $166,000. So they had to make it up. They had to get the money from someplace else because only 22% of the income came from that Medicare. Besides the 60 minutes publicity that she got, she did newsletters 3 times a year.
Yeah, 3 times a year.
She would write a newsletter to every donor, and they would be very sympathetic stories. She'd tell them about the reality of what's happening with people and use their names and tell them what she was able to do for them. She also produced a letter every month, called doctor's rounds, and did the same thing. She would tell about the people that she had been working with and appeal to the donors' money, actually. She was also on Good Morning America. So when you think about those three powerful media options within our country, it was amazing that this nun by herself in this small clinic in the middle of Mississippi, in this poorest county in the country, was able to get on that kind of powerful platform. Some of the things that she wanted us to know is that the lack of food, not just food, but good food. Food stamps covers only 78 cents per person per meal. And trying to feed your family on that kind of money, the result is obesity, hypertension, diabetes. She told us about a girl, a 16-year-old girl, that she had last seen her when the girl was 6 months old. And she now, at age 16, weighed 267 pounds from malnutrition and was inactive, not going outside. She got the reputation for being welcoming to anybody who needed help, and people would come to her in the middle of the night, or they'd call her to come to them in the middle of the night. And one of the most dramatic ones she told us about is the 15-year-old girl, 2 a.m. in the morning, coming to Dr. Cook's house. She was 5 months pregnant, and she said, "My baby's coming." And Dr. Cook said, "How do you know?" And she said, "Because the feet are coming out." The fetus was dead, but the feet were coming out feet first. And she took care of the girl, and then she in her car took the girl to the hospital. There are many, many examples of that we've found in her work. That's just one. So that's the individual patient. That's the clinic that she has established. And she turned her, that's not enough, she turned her vision to the community. Because the community, as Sally said, was a dying community. And she attracted other nuns to come help her, and one of them was a community organizer. And when Sister Maureen came, she met with the people and she thought, well, what do they want? They're going to want housing, they're going to want employment. That's not what they wanted. They wanted to clean up their town. And they had blacks and whites get together, and they were picking up garbage, and they said they even got the fire hoses out and squirted the roads. But they felt this sense of pride at the beginning. The next thing they wanted was a Christmas parade. And a nearby town had thrown away their Christmas decorations. They went and got those, and they painted the bells up, and they spruced them up. They had a parade, and they had bands. And all this was with food and music. And as Sister Ann said, they were breaking down the racial barriers, even though that's not but that wasn't their intention. That was what was happening. They didn't have street signs. So they got a project together to simply label their streets. They got kids that could draw to paint the street sign, and the fire department somehow was able to cut the signs and make the poles. That was also a sense of pride. But the biggest thing they did was a community center. This is here. I want you just to look at this. I've got 2 pages here of things that they accomplished. So she retired from the clinic in 2017. At that point, the caseload had grown from 700 patients per year to 10,000 patients annually. 4 additions had been made to this original building. They had a full array of medical services with general treatment, physical therapy, EKGs, X-rays, lab services, and eye exams. The staff had grown from, and plus 2 nuns, to 29 paid staff. The donor base was 20,000, and it supported the the clinic's $1.6 million annual budget, the Pearly Gates insurance policy, the People magazine, Good Morning America, and 60 Minutes. They established a bargain bar, which was essentially a place for people to go and buy used clothes for 10 cents, 50 cents. The caseload had increased to be 20% white people. And the death and dying support that they established, exercise and fitness classes, food bank, GED training with 45 graduates, grocery shopping carpool, which was essential because there was no good, it was a food desert, as they say, and the furthest away, they couldn't get there because they didn't have any transportation. Home repair clinic, literacy classes, new houses built through Delta Habitat for Humanity, nutrition training, parenting classes, a big project where the Tutwiler quilters were teaching one another about the quilting, and they were having nationwide sales, and they were honored by the Smithsonian Museum. Some of the quilts are in the Smithsonian. They opened a satellite clinic, and they had sexual abuse awareness training. And that is a long list of accomplishments that made this place certainly more than a doctor's office. We thought a lot about personal power, and this is one woman who is unique. Not many people come along that have this kind of intelligence and physical strength, spiritual strength. She's truly unique, but that doesn't mean that others can't have personal power themselves. In her words, she would tell you, look around you. Who is hurting? Who can't read? Who is too old to drive to the store? Who is unable to think clearly? If you search with eyes of love, you'll always find someone to help. If you listen with a loving ear, you will hear the voice of God. Those were her words to tell people to use the power that you have and know that you can attract people to you by being steadfast, watching, listening, and in the words of Mother Teresa, she would say, don't worry about numbers. Help one person at a time, and always start with the person nearest to you. I don't know, overlooking sound.
And hers is a truly remarkable story, and I just wonder, are there any questions that you all have? Well, I tell you what.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Yeah.
Please speak up for us.
Mhm.
So y'all think Sister Anne
That's a good. I think that's a good question. She asked if Dr. Brooks would have become a doctor if she had not had the encouragement from Dr. Upledger. Is that your question? That's a good question. I hadn't thought that, but I think that's his power. And because he recognized, and I think it goes along exactly with what Jean was saying, that you pay attention to the other. And he was paying attention, and he recognized something in Anne Brooks that was powerful. And so he knew that she would be a good doctor. During her time in the clinic, when she was working with the patients there, she was also pumping the doctors who were volunteering there for any kind of information about the medical care. She had demonstrated that interest very definitely, but it never had crossed her mind that she might become a doctor. until he started encouraging her. And so I think that's an excellent question and something that frankly hadn't occurred to me. And that's good. Yeah, it's that power, that when we say the power of one, we're not talking about one leader that just goes out and gets all this accomplished. I think her most important power is just exactly what you were bringing up that Dr. Upledger had, was that she had the power to activate others, and her caring for others who had not even had the power to take care of themselves or believe in themselves. She had that power. Plus, when you think about all the community, as one of the women who is very active in the community center that was built, well, actually it was converted from an empty building, but it has incredible programs for all ages there in Tutwiler. One of she said that Ann Brooks was just, Tutwiler would have just diminished and just gone away if she was their angel, because she came and she had that ability to recognize something in everyone she met and pull them up to activate their power. That's a really good, and the thing is, she didn't argue. She didn't, we're in a nation right now that we depend on the political power of others, but that's not, she understood it, but she went from a different approach rather than telling people what they should do or what they should think. She listened to them. And probably also, I think, is because she was a teacher to begin with. She was a teacher for 18 years. And she knew, when you're teaching, you have to listen to where that person is in the classroom and then bring them along. There's some funny stories. She had a quirky personality that was really just delightful, that came out too. It was an amazing woman.
We wondered if things, after all this, the question would come up, well, she's gone now. How are they doing? Was it worth it? Did it last? So we called the clinic this past week, and yes, it has lasted. They said that the donors are still sending in the money. They're getting donors from Canada, they're getting them from Hawaii. It's not a small undertaking at all, and it hadn't diminished. And they said that the town was cleaner, the town was calmer. What else did she tell us? Obviously.
Well, that reminds me that I think some of the Tutwiler Clinic folks are on the Zoom, and I wish you were here to answer some of the specific questions, because you lived with her. When she left, there was a staff. As we said, she started with 3. There were two helpers and Dr. Brooks. And all 3 of them were nuns. And when she left, she had a staff of 29, and the clinic had been expanded 4 times, I think, that just to accommodate. Well, what you saw the numbers from 700 a year to 9,000 a year. That's quite a growth, and so that is. But she had the ability when, there were, it was, I'm just trying to think what it was. She got local people involved, and then she was giving addresses. She has about 6 or 7 honorary degrees from various colleges around the country. But of course, when she went to address those, she always told the story of Tutwiler. So she, as Jean said, was savvy in the way she was so dedicated to making that a livable and wonderful place to be. I think that, I think, where's Aaron?
Are there any other questions?
You know what, one of the things I will just mention it, because you never know who might be in the audience that might know someone. I just think about, I think hers is such a remarkable story that it should be a movie, because it shows how people can come together and accomplish so much. And there's so much now, we're just seeing how our world seems to be splitting apart. And we need stories of that kind that show where people do come together. And it's just this little story and that little story, and it builds. I sure do thank you all for coming. And I don't.
Thank you all for coming tonight. We appreciate your participation. One last announcement though. The night would not be complete without wishing Ms. Fisher a very happy birthday. Today is her birthday, so we could all give her a quick round of applause for that. Thank you and Dr. Thomason for joining us tonight and for sharing your wonderful insights into the life of Sister and Dr. Ambrose. Thank you all very much.